queda inaugurado.
The Forum Global Deal is inaugurated. We'll give the floor now to the first panel, Social Dialogue for the Greening of the Economy in Times of Crisis. It will be moderated by the director of the Stefanos Carpeta.
I was saying that the title of our panel is Social Dialogue for the Greening of the Economy in Time of Crisis. And I think the title of this event, this panel, cannot be more appropriate. As we have heard from the opening remarks of our meeting today, policymakers, but actually all the social partners, are facing the double challenge, on the one hand of promoting the digital transition, promoting a green transition, but at the very same time also to deal with the short-term challenges from COVID-19 to, of course, the cost of living crisis. There is simply no question that the world of work is and will be facing major challenges in the transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies. Labor market indeed will need to accommodate significant economic restructuring. Jobs will shift across sectors and actually across locations. And many workers will have to acquire new skills, new talents, but actually to some extent also move following the new emerging greener jobs. Fair and inclusive labor markets are indeed necessary to ensure that the three interrelated dimensions of sustainable development, the economic dimension, the social, and the environmental dimension, can be addressed together in the promotion of a just transition to a net zero carbon economy. Indeed, as the Secretary General of the OECD said, if well managed, the net zero transition will be able to generate many good jobs, but no doubt there will also be significant challenges in promoting this job, but also helping workers reach out to these jobs. But indeed, we are living from one crisis to the other, from the COVID-19 crisis, which certainly challenged a lot our economies, our society, to a new crisis, the cost of living crisis. And indeed, we have to promote the longer-term transformation of our economies together with the short-term challenges that these crises certainly pose. And these crises, if not managed well, can actually undermine our progress towards the more longer-term digital, and in particular the green transition. So the panel today, the first panel of our conference, will address the role of social dialogue, which has been crucial during the COVID. I think is crucial now in handling the cost of living crisis, but will be also crucial for the digital and for the green transition. We'll discuss specific contributions that social dialogue in different forms have actually played, and also discuss how going forward social dialogue can be an important tool to really make sure that the transitions we are facing are fair and actually promote economic and social development. With no further words from me, but let me basically present our lead speakers today in this panel. I'm honored to have such a rich panel. I will introduce all of them. We have the Minister of Labor and Social Security of Uruguay, Mr. Pablo Mieres. Welcome, Minister. We have the Minister of Labor of the Dominican Republic, Mr. Luis Miguel de Camps Garcia Mella. Welcome. Great pleasure to have you with us. We have Stephen Cotton, the General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation. Welcome. Okay. We have Karina Cabezas, the President of Sodexo Iberia. We have Luis Rodrigo Morales, the Senior Advisor of the International Organization of Employers. Welcome to this meeting. And we have Valeria Ronzitti, the General Secretary of SGI Europe. We are also supposed to have the Deputy Minister of Employment and Labor of South Africa, Mrs. Boitumelo Moloi. The Minister, unfortunately, I think the flight was delayed. We hope that she will be able to join the rest of the conference, but we are very pleased to have Mr. Sinabonga Edebe, the Labor Attaché at the Permanent Delegation of the United Nations in Geneva. Welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you in the panel. You see, we have a very rich panel. There are so many issues we would like to discuss, so I invite all our speakers to stay within the 5 minutes for the first intervention they will make. I will actually ask a specific question to each of them, and then in the second round, I really would like to also ask all of you the same question. What is the role of social dialogue in dealing with the present crisis we are facing? So how we move from the COVID-19 to the cost of living crisis. So I'd like to start with you, Minister Mieres. Okay. I think it's fair to say that Uruguay is widely praised for its decarbonization efforts. Renewable energy, if our data are correct, represent already 98% of the electricity generation. This is very impressive indeed. But also is a country with a long tradition of social dialogue. So I guess the question for you, Minister, is really how social dialogue has been a tool, an important element in actually promoting this green transformation in your country. Over to you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody. It is really a great pleasure. I'm thankful for the invitation to participate in the panel, and I'm very interested in listening to all the panelists who are here with us, and also in the following panels. The Uruguayan government has committed itself to transition and to promote clean production in all areas. The energy is made up of 98% from renewable wind energy and others, and at this moment in time it is number one in Latin America in this field. And there is a commitment of joint work in the ministries for economy and finance, the environment, for fishing and agriculture industry and mining and work and social security in order to make progress in political solutions that are horizontal for a sustainable policy. This guarantees the synergy in government management in making progress with environmental commitments without there being the blocks of the objectives of the different ministries. And the work has been started up for a methodology of measuring the footprint, the environmental footprint in the livestock farming, and to see investments, indicators of sustainability, and at the same time indicators related with the creation of jobs. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, the Uruguayan government made an issue of $1.5 million for the fulfillment of objectives for 2025, one of the first initiatives at international level for reducing greenhouse gases and for conserving native forests, and the rates paid by Uruguayans will be better if they comply with the goals. With the support of the PAGE program, a methodology has been employed for measurement, and the study in 2021 published this year indicates a duplication of the number of green and blue employment compared to and reaching a large number of work. This is a modest figure because it represents 5% of the economically active population of the country, but it shows at the same time a significant growth and the will of promoting the creation of environmentally sustainable employment. But in any case, we need to deepen and improve the techniques of measurement in order to better adjust the number of green jobs. Looking forward, for increasing jobs, we can identify 3 fields that are specifically dynamic in order to increase for the future the employment which is environmentally sustainable, the management of waste, green hydrogen and electrical mobility. The national program will determine the growing incorporation of jobs in the classification through the formalization and the setting up of cooperative companies. With regards to the development of energy initiatives founded in the production of green hydrogen, it can be said that it will represent a growth of about 6,000 or 9,000 new jobs in the next 7 years, and the following decade it is assessed that it could reach 34,000 new jobs. The development of electric mobility also involves another opportunity of increasing the number of environmentally sustainable jobs, although it isn't possible to estimate today the quantitative growth. The indications are that it will grow. With regards to the tripartite social dialogue, with training, with representatives of workers, employers and the government, grants the gaining of skills with emphasis on an environment with a horizontal course of environmental perspective, as well as carrying out electrical mobility courses in order to requalify car mechanics. And at a business level, we have to stress that the Union of Exporters is encouraging green exports and practices to help companies in order to comply with sustainable practices. So the government, as well as the social players, there is a priority that is translated in specific facts in order to progress towards a country which is environmentally sustainable. These are some of the ideas with regards to this first question made by Stefano. Many thank you indeed. Many thanks, Minister.
Goals of your country, but also the different role that employers, workers, and actually society as a whole is playing. I'd like to turn to you, Minister De Camps García Mella. Die contribuciones determinadas a nivel nacional, in that context, the Dominican Republic has made a very significant commitment, a 27% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 compared to the business as usual. This is indeed an impressive objective commitment you have made. So in that context, what has been, what will be the role of social dialogue in actually achieving this important target?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for allowing me to change with all these distinguished guests in this important event, all the organizers and representation, obviously the Ministry of Labor of the Dominican Republic, but also of the Ibero-American Association, which we preside at this moment. We're talking about dialogue, transition, and human development. We cannot talk just about growth. But we also have to talk about human development if we want to talk about inclusivity. And in that context, as you well pointed out in your question, the Dominican Republic has made some significant commitments with regards to COP, which is also taking place today, I think, in Egypt. And this is due to the fact that according to the analysis that we made by international organizations as well as national organizations, apart from the United States and Germany, the potential for the creation of green employment, which the Dominican Republic has, is very important. But before going very specifically into the case of the Dominican Republic, I think it is important to mention the current diagnosis. And in that sense, I want to refer to the region. The current diagnosis for the region, we can see that almost 78 million jobs are jobs which have to do with bioeconomy, livestock farming, agriculture, which has to do with construction, transportation, with tourism, among other activities which have a great deal of potential in order to become green or in becoming more friendly to the environment. And with this context of 78 million, for example, Argentina and here, our distinguished minister from Uruguay, and there's 35% of these kinds of employments. But if we go to Bolivia, however, it's almost 60% of their employments. And Brazil, which is one of the biggest economies in the region, here we're talking about, they have about 50% of employment in these areas, which would allow them to carry out that transition process. We want to mention this because not only the vision of what there is in the commitments, but also what is the raw material which we have to produce these transformations of transition. And we know, obviously, that we know investment, intelligent investment, training, gaining skills in order to get this decent work. With regards to the diagnosis, with these figures of 78 million of jobs that can be transformed towards the green transition in the Latin American region or Spanish-speaking region, about 20 million of these jobs are done by women. The rest is by men. So if we want that commitment of having a fairer transition and including everybody, that is something we have to look at. Unfortunately, about 20%, almost 20% of the studies in STEMs are made up by women, whereas the rest is by men. And so this has to be examined and attended to, because just looking at the qualification, we can close the gap between the market demand and the offering in human resources, particularly in the Dominican Republic. We have the National Pact for Green Technical Training, which intends to train in all of these areas, women and men, in a very inclusive and proactive way. And in recent days, the Dominican Republic has been approving more than 24 projects for renewable energy of different sizes, compared to the current conditions. And one of the importance of these forums for dialogue is to be able to identify the difficulties presented, for example, by the war situation in Europe with its effects on the world, and to try to identify that indeed it is a big problem, but we have to convert them into an opportunity. And when we see the risk of sustainability or fuels, and in this situation of war instability, we have to support renewable energy more than in countries where, in the Dominican Republic, where we don't have fossil fuels, where we have to go more towards renewable energies and its production. And I can't finish without saying the following with regards to the contributions that open this forum and talking about integrality. The economy of platforms is not just a reality, but it's also a reality which is growing. And in the context of dialogue, as a cornerstone of the construction of the sustainable regulations, we have to push to achieve the economy of platforms, and the world of work can have the general foundations which will allow protection, because if we don't do that, we wouldn't be talking about inclusion, particularly of the social protection granted by Social Security. Ladies and gentlemen, if we allow us if we forget about the economy of platforms and we don't deal with it, and with the increase of this informality and lack of protection, this will create a systemic risk of the social security systems of all of our countries. So if we want to talk about protection and inclusion, we have to also remember social security. And in this context, we are clearly focused on achieving and going in that direction. We understand that the Dominican Republic, in the next 5 years, we would have the commitment of creating, within this context and definition, about 12%, almost 12% of the jobs in our country would have a link with green employment or with employment that can become green. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister.
You raise a number of very important issues. First, I think it was definitely important to stress the link between the digital transformation and the development of platform economy with the green transition. They're happening at the same time, and there are a lot of interlinkages between them. If we fail on one, we might not be able to proceed on the other, and certainly we might not promote a fair transition or transitions. But also thank you for mentioning another important point, the fact that there are many million jobs in your region that could be transformed into green jobs, and actually point to the human capital as a key factor to actually promote this transition. Thank you very much. So we have heard from two ministers on a number of very significant concrete initiatives they put in place, but also a number of challenges. I'd like now to go to the General Secretary, Stephen Cotton, to look at what the business can do and what the role of work and trade unions. So the data suggests that 50,000 cargo ships of the world oceans are actually emitting as much greenhouse gases as the entire industrialized country of Japan and Germany. And in and around COP26 in 2021, the ITF and maritime industry partners established an initiative to plan and speed up the decarbonization of the maritime sector, one being an agreement with the Global Maritime Forum, the other being the creation of Maritime Just Transition Task Force. So what do these initiatives entail, and what role do they give to social dialogue to drive the change required to carbon emission in this very important sector?
Thanks, Stefano, and good afternoon, everyone. First, a little bit about shipping. I feel like I'm here to apologise because those figures are phenomenal. But shipping moves 80% of global trade. So when we capture the size of carbon compared to the impact, we have to look at what we're going to do about it. The reality is seafarers, and I would say transport workers, and we saw through the pandemic, kept our societies going. There's no option for remote working. They have to be on the ships, they have to be in the trucks, they have to be in the warehouses. Through the work we're doing, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, we believe 750,000 seafarers, which in the scheme of the conversation doesn't sound like a lot, but that's nearly 3/4 of the whole of the labour force in shipping needs to be retrained, and they need to be reskilled by 2030 on the way to 2050. And we think we have a methodology to deliver the Paris Agreement. But if we want to describe what is just transition, it needs to be fair, well managed, equitable, and of course it has to be human focused. And the opening speeches reaffirm that it has to be incredibly inclusive. Of course, the way we want to approach this is by strengthening social dialogue. And we have a history, and I'll go into that a little bit later, between maritime employers, and it's a complex employment relationship, many of it's precarious, but maritime employers, seafarers unions supported by international organisations, and again with national governments who have done a lot for us in the ILO arena. In order to do that, we have to address what are these future challenges. We have to identify what they are and then what we're going to do. So first, we see many social challenges, but I'll highlight the priorities for you. We have a skills shortage, and I think every speaker from a union perspective says we have a skills shortage in all of our labour markets. But then we also have to identify what are the skills gaps, particularly when we talk about new green opportunities. We have the question of occupational safety and health. Many of the potential alternative fuels bring a high level of risk, and we need to discuss that not just across the table, but then back through the international UN bodies and national bodies. We mentioned women, and at the moment, partly because of the pandemic, many seafarers didn't get on and off their ships for a long period of time. It's not the most attractive of a career. And then, again, shamefully, there's only 1.3% of the current workforce that are women. So that is a significant problem for whichever part of the industry we represent. And then I think the question about digitalisation and automation has to be dealt with. If none of you know, trade unionists don't really like change, and this is some of the most significant change we'll have seen in our lifetime. So how are we going to manage those challenges? We have to have workers' voices at the table at the outset, explaining why green jobs are important and what we can do about that. The ITF has an ITF sustainable shipping paper, but we believe it can only be delivered by proper, transparent social dialogue. So just to go into a little bit of detail, last year in Glasgow, the UN Global Compact, our friends at the ILO, International Labour Organisation, our friends at the International Maritime Organisation, our counterparts in the International Chamber of Shipping, and us, set out what we are going to do to meet those challenges. And yes, we call it just transition, and for me that invokes what are we going to do with the miners of today and some of those challenges. But in other sectors, there has to be different approaches and it has to be more subtle in the delivery. But it has to be done between governments, the industry, so for us it's the ship owners, the workers, that's the unions, we're the official counterpart, and of course academia. And we need to prepare future-proof strategies that means we recognise what we've got to do, and then that impacts on all the major brands, on our friends in industrial when it comes to manufacturing, our friends in retail. So these issues are utterly critical, but it actually is an example of social dialogue. So we've put together a global industry peer learning group, they've all got quite long titles, I'm sorry, comprising representatives of international organisations, individual significant shipping companies, and workers, and academia, and trainers. Because I think we have to look at the whole methodology and look at how do we build the skills. We have a strategic engagement framework. So that's the institutional partners, where we are looking. So we've commissioned a report. That's where we got the 750,000 jobs from. And we're now looking at policy partnerships where we'll work with, I use the word, the coalition of the willing. It seems surprising in 2022 anyone isn't willing to take the climate challenge, but it does involve national governments, significant players, and the primary method is to have a conversation, dialogue, recognise what's achievable. Maritime is quite unique in many of the workers are from the global south, so we are having conversations. The biggest provider of seafarers is the Philippines, and we're talking directly to the Philippines government about how to be ready, but we want it to be inclusive of all of the nations. We're also looking, there we mentioned money. Money is a big part of this conversation. How do we fund these initiatives? And there's conversations going on in many bodies about how we can do that. And then I think the bit that, again, sometimes for workers is a bit scary, technical partnerships. We see a lot of product placement in these conversations in the future, and sometimes that's intimidating. Can we understand what the technology is, and can we translate that into issues that workers can handle? Major priorities: gathering data and information, sharing it with our stakeholders, and then discussing and discussing again. Not a talking shop, but clear, hard facts. Identify and assess what are our principles. So how can we do this? What's the best way of transitioning? I won't say that maritime is the best sector as a starting point. So we have some existing challenges, and we have to bring these up to speed. And I think the primary issue there is, how do we make sure that we have a blueprint? And I was talking to some of my colleagues on the panel. Transparency and mutual respect are fundamental for this. So if we don't start with an open strategy and we don't share what are our strategic objectives, we won't be able to build a collegiate approach. You mentioned the Global Maritime Forum, which is another body of, frankly, interested parties in shipping, and that includes ship owners, regulators, financiers, a lot of conversations about ESG. They've issued the Poseidon Principles, which is all about greening shipping. And let's not you build a ship, its life expectancy is 20 years. It just happens to be the most critical 20 years. So the business challenge is what's a good investment and how to deal with it. Oops, sorry. If you allow me, Stefano, you always expect the union speakers to breach the 5 minutes. Just a couple of other partnerships that we should mention. Public transport, C40, the mayors, we're working collaboratively with them about urban transport, and we're also trying to encourage the civil aviation, which again sits outside of the Paris Agreement, how to green civil aviation. And a massive congratulations to the Spanish government for their riders policy, which is frankly world leading. So I'll stop there, and maybe you'll give me another opportunity later.
Thank you very much indeed. I think there are a number of key words in what your intervention that absolutely resonate well with what we've heard from the ministers. Understanding, there are complex issues here, and I think in your sector, in many of the other sectors, understanding, sharing the information, doing what you said, a blueprint of transition, I think is very important, and indeed I think resonate with what's happening also in other sectors. But also transparency and indeed dialogue, so and a constructive social dialogue. I think you also made it very clear that you are open to the changes, but these changes have indeed to be fair and improve working conditions for the workers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really a live event, so I'm very pleased that the Vice Minister of Employment and Labour of South Africa, Mrs. Boitumelo Moloi, has been able to join us. Welcome, Minister. It's a great pleasure to have you. I let you relax a little bit and go to one of the other panelists, but I will certainly come to you after that. So I'd like to go to Karina Cabezas of Sodexo. So we have heard the ministers, we have heard the representative from the worker. I think it would be also interesting from hear from you. I think Sodexo has been again on the front line of a number of important transformations from Scope 1 to Scope 2 to actually working on the supply chain. So again, I'd like to hear from you your experience about the role of social dialogue in actually promoting this transformation in Sodexo.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias por invitarme.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this innovative event to talk about these things. It's extremely useful for all of us. I would like to present my company very briefly. I belong to Sodexo. It's an organization, a global organization. We employ 420,000 people around the world, and we externalize services to 100 million consumers, everyday consumers from the world of restoration, but also facilitating management and the management of buildings. I represent Sodexo in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. We just have 7,000 in Spain, so very small compared to the organization as a whole, but our objectives and our focus are objectives which emanate from the setting up of our organization more than 50 years ago in Marseille in France. The mission of our organization is a mission which is aimed at improving and contributing to the economic and social and environmental situation of the countries where we work, and we want to improve the quality of life of people with our daily work, with small actions and small details. It is true that we have goals of sustainability, like reducing the issues of the greenhouse gases by 34% by 2025. We're already measuring that impact that an organization like ours have. There are 420,000 people that belong to our company, and all the stakeholders working with us around us, and who make up 160,000 more, with objectives of reducing waste in restaurants, to supply, have responsible supply, what purchases are sustainable, how we are encouraging sustainable foods, and how we're managing the efficiency. And now I'll give you some very specific data. We reduced by 24% the emissions of CO2 and reach 3 for the 26.2% with renewable sources, and we have reduced the waste by 20-odd% since 2010, since we've been measuring it. So we're involving clients who outsource us and who look for values like ours, who are also pursuing not just price like a few years ago, but also what human values and what values focused on people are at the core. People are at the core, and our customers want to hire companies whose employees and workers are form part of these activities, and also the suppliers whom we can have an impact on, and to do purchases that are fully sustainable, the logistics chain, the buying at source, local products from small suppliers close to our operation centers, everything that impacts our way of working with them in the supply chain. Purchases particularly should be sustainable of products and raw materials, of protected species and everything, and also collaborators, and how our strategy in the care of our planet, in putting people first, improves our engagement, improves the commitment of our workers, and how social agents, how we have changed dialogue with the social agents over the last 2 years. I think this is one of the few good things that the pandemic has brought us, how we work differently, we work together, we work in line, and we're all with the social agents negotiating plans for equality and talking about diversity and how it affects and impacts business results, clearly not only financial results but also KPIs, safety at work, or the commitment of workers. We're working with them about how the network of women are affecting the improvement and the ratios of employability of women within business and so forth. I insist that the key of all of this is how social dialogue has changed, how it affects social dialogue in an organization like mine, which is the one I know, and how that is to working together hand in hand and changing the paradigm in which we are all immersed. So thank you very much.
Again, a number of important points. Prices actually are only one element. What is behind the price of a good or a service is also the quality of work, and I think that's an important point. And the other, I very much like the point you made about the fact that if there is one thing which is positive about the pandemic or the COVID-19 has been actually to promote more dialogue at a time in which we're all confronted to unprecedented challenges. Minister Molloy, I'd like to come to you. In 2021 of November, the partnership between the government of South Africa, the United States, the UK, France, Germany, and the EU mobilized some 8.5 billion over the next 3 to 5 years as a first step to support the implementation of South Africa's just transition from coal-fueled energy. So what has been, this is a very ambitious target again, what has been the role of social dialogue and the role of social partners in actually moving forward on this impressive agenda?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Our moderator, let me acknowledge all the protocol as it has already been laid down. I must say that we need to apologize for we have been messed up by the flight schedules and the delayed flights. We've been stranded somewhere in Dubai. Our apologies. I must say that I am the Deputy Minister of Employment and Labour from South Africa. And I must say to you that we are thankful for this platform and the opportunity to come to this high impact panel and to share with you what is happening in our country. But I think first and foremost, we must also mention the fact that this conference is organized under the theme towards just transition and sustainable labor markets. It's one of the primary global annual events on the High Panel Social Dialogue Forum. But we are, South Africa, certain that when we speak here, we speak on behalf of everyone when we say that we are eternally grateful to the founders of this noble idea. And we are also thankful to the organizers of this event for the great job that you have done so far. And I must just give you, from our South African, to applaud you for this job well done. But I want to preface my response with the following South African context so that we put things into perspective of a just transition from a coal fuel energy. I'm sure most of you have also read the recent report by the World Bank's Country Climate and Development, the CCDR, jointly released by the World Bank and the Presidential Climate Commission of South Africa. The report highlights, among others, key policy and investments which are needed to achieve South Africa's climate goals, and in the following triple transition approach. The President has come up with three main approaches to say, among others, one, a low carbon transition whereby greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by moving away from coal, as you all are aware of. Number two, a resilient transition. And this is about putting in place mechanisms to enable vulnerable sectors and communities in our country to withstand or bounce back from climate impacts such as drought, floods, and heat waves. I'm sure you would be aware of the fact that climate change is causing a lot of things, and you are aware also recently we had devastating floods in one of our provinces in KZN, which are climate change related. But the third point is a just transition which protects the poor and the vulnerable from being adversely impacted by taking steps to achieve these climate goals. And overall, the combination of these transitions is expected, obviously, over a period from 2022 to the year 2050. It will cost us something to the region of 8.5 trillion, which would be something like 4.4% of our GDP. So if we have to really go deeper into actually explaining further this whole phenomenon, I think all of us, we are abreast of the announcement in November 2021 in the partnership between the governments of South Africa, the US and the UK, France, Germany, and the EU, which actually mobilized the 8.5 billion, as you have already alluded to, over the next 3 to 5 years. And as a first step to support us in terms of the implementation of South Africa's just transition from coal-fueled energy. Involving social partners in this instance in the development of this investment plan can be a key to formulate more inclusive spending plans. And I'm sure you are aware in South Africa we've got what is called network, where you find the business component, where you find organized labor and the community. That's a standard set where we engage with the different sectors in our country as and when there are issues that we need to agree on. So you have the business sector that comes in, you have the organized labor, because if you can't consult with those, surely there can be chaos in the country. So you have to have some level of consensus with all of this. But you are aware, without getting too much into detail, that this just transition might not necessarily be what we need currently as the country, especially more so when you look into one of our provinces, which is Mpumalanga, where the bulk of our coal, which can still last to the next 100 years. And we have to just like really abruptly stop the operations. What do we do with those people who are dependent on that coal? When currently now the world, due to the what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, now there's all of a sudden there's a demand for coal. What do we do with our coal? As much as we are into conforming to some of the conventions, but we also need to mitigate somehow as to our vulnerable South Africans who are dependent on this coal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Indeed, you point in the last reflection you shared with us what we were sort of starting to discuss at the beginning, is how to reconcile the short-term challenges we are all facing, including, of course, the cost of energy, with actually the needed transformation, the green transformation. So I think no doubt your country and all other countries are facing daunting challenges on that. Mm-hmm. I'd like to go to Luis Rodrigo Morales of the International Organization of Employers. And really, I would like to ask you, what is the role of your organization in promoting social dialogue as a way to actually facilitating the green transition? There is a lot to be learned. I mean, we have heard here from Minister, from representative of the workers, from companies. What is the role of IOE in promoting good practices and this notion of a fair transition?
Muchas gracias, Stefano.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and good evening. It's a great honor to be here today and to share this panel with the distinguished panelists. So I'd like to thank the government of Spain for inviting us along, and to the organizers of Global Deal and the OECD and the ILO. So a little note of who we are. We are a network in the private sector, the biggest in the world, and we cover 50 million companies, almost 150 members in 150 different countries. So our members are employers' federations, and so this is how we try to have an effect on the design and the implementation of social policies and employment policies. So from the ILO, we've been committed very much, along with them, to sustainability and the climate, working with international organizations and governments and other members on this subject. So our greatest value, I think, is not just the size of our network. We have very representative organizations which have an ability to disseminate a lot of information and effective policies. We use this network to spread knowledge and to share best practices, but also to undertake coordinated action. So currently we're working with our members in identifying links between human rights and climate change, which is a key aspect when we talk about climate change, specifically questions like other questions in supporting our members to be able to introduce the right sort of policies through their affiliated companies and fair transitions. So our organization has been involved with climate action with United Nations, and the ILO were members of their consultative committee, and this enables us to take on board ambitious climate-oriented action to be able to create decent jobs. And we have a great deal to collaborate in the reduction of greenhouse gases on site, making the most of the capacities and skills of our members in all the different countries. And more recently, in following up after the COP26 and looking at COP27, which will be starting soon, we have launched a working party on a fair transition with our members. It's a kind of a hub of knowledge exchange on challenges and coordinated action in the business world towards one common aim. So in the COP27, we've launched an employers alliance for green skills, which has to do with this adaptation of the labor market and filling this vacuum as regards skills. It's so important, as mentioned by our minister in her contribution. So we have to build awareness amongst our responsible members so that they bring in the right type of policies, green and efficient systems. So we are convinced that to be able to face the challenges of a fair transition, we have to really look at business sectors who are prepared to take on board programs which should support new opportunities in the economic world, with jobs that are more sustainable. So promoted by the employers' associations, we are trying to change the perception of technical education, make it more attractive, and persuade governments to analyze the gaps in this training and look at channels of knowledge interchange and exchange. So our participation a few weeks ago, in the future, in the COP27 will involve a lot of new policies to do with financing new structures for new jobs and increasing the ability of financing projects for companies and increasing access to new technologies. New technologies which the developed countries have much more access to for a better transition and greater development across the board for the production of more effective infrastructures and sustainable energies. So then we have looking at the impact on the labour market. What else can we do to reinforce our analysis of the effects of climate change on the labour markets? We have consistent planning for this transition. We have to develop a more integrated approach for policies based on the concerns of employees and always thinking about the diversity of companies, different sectors, and guarantee that the skill building in the private sector is paid attention to, and that this forms part of every climate-based and fair transition policy. So it needs to be a transition which really answers the needs of the labour market and the concerns of all workers. This is vital in this new environment. Thank you.
For this reflection as well on the role of the International Organization of Employers. I'd like now to come to the General Secretary of AGI Europe, Valeria Ronzitti. I think the question I have for you, Valeria, is really if you have some good example of social dialogue as a way really to create social cohesion, to actually to foster the process of transition to a greener economy.
Thank you very much, Stefano. As is the first time that my organization is participating to the Global Deal Forum, which is a pleasure and an honor. Just a few words about who we are. SGI Europe represent employers of services of general interest all over Europe. So transport, water, electricity providers, but also education, healthcare, social services. And we employ roughly 30%, our members employ 30% of the European workforce, and we contribute to 26% of the EU GDP. I feel really small because I'm the only European scoping member of this panel, but at the same time I feel reassured because it's always refreshing to go out of the Brussels bubble where we are, you know, really micro-centered, and you discover elsewhere that indeed social dialogue is flourishing all over the world, and this is really refreshing. I would say that the key sentence of the example that I'm going to give you is that really there is no just transition without social dialogue. But as Stephen was open enough to say that trade unions are not so open to change, I can equally say that employers are not so fond of change. Very much also because of the very pertinent example that Minister Molloy made. When you have an entire region or an entire sector, for instance, depending on coal, and if I name our Polish members are very much in this case, they hardly understand why all of a sudden someone is imposing them to change the economic model. And I would say that in a very unpolitically correct way, which is, as you will see my characteristic, sometimes we need an external push. And the external push for us has been the European Green Deal. So the European Commission, imposed to us at the European level the frame through which undergoes this green transition. I'm quite frank saying that without that, many would not move. So it's a good thing, but of course it's a challenge to reach it. And the external environment, I don't know if we will have time to speak about the crisis, the energy crisis, the Ukrainian war, is just an accelerator of factors that were already there since decades, and we were just not acting upon it. I can't speak about all approaches that we are taking on this issue. Just say that from our membership perspective, we are in a somehow privileged position because members in transport and in the energy sectors since many years were already seeing the business case in going through the transition. Think at the Energiewende in Germany and many other factors. So we were already in this kind of conversation because of the sectors we are representing. And one of the key factors we have been focusing in, just like in the example of Mr. Morales, is skills. I wouldn't like to reduce the issue of transition to skills. Is a kind of, how do you say, natural factor that employers call on. Is all about skills, reskilling, upskilling. Is not just that, because without, for instance, investment in the right infrastructure, you will never get out through it. So employers cannot do it alone. You can be the best in skilling and reskilling, but you need the external infrastructure to achieve the goal. But still, of course, skills is directly in our remit, and that's why we worked on this. Since 2 years, we are conducting a project which is called Green Skills in the Vocational Education and Training. We are going to have our final conference on the 5th of December in Brussels. And for me, the added value, the game changer for this project is that we started working since day one with education and vocational and training providers, which are, and we have also this competitive advantage in our membership because we affiliate the Sectoral Federation for Education and VAT. This is so important because sometimes there is this dichotomy. The employers look for the right skills, but the education and training system is not delivering. So that the conversation ends with the famous skills mismatch mantra. And you cannot go beyond this if you do not create this conversation since the very start, together with those who have to provide education and training and vocational education and training. So we have many examples within this project. I would only quote one, which comes from France, the electricity and gas sectors in France. They signed a very effective sectoral collective agreement in 2020, encouraging the energy sector to adapt to the energy, green and digital transition. So they put together the two because they have to go together. What we find is agreement guaranteeing the right level of employee skills in changing occupation, support company-level transformation, ensure long-term employability of workers in the sector, and then ensure sectoral training policy and accessibility to training for all employees of all enterprises of all size. Because when we speak about SGI, we only think about big groups, but there are also many local public utilities that are like SMEs. And I finish because I see your body language. One other aspect, and it was quoted by some of you, is also a pledge to increase female participation in utilities. We have the biggest share of women working in healthcare, social services, education, but so few in transport and energy. So this project also wants to raise the share of women in energy and transport. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the point you made, the just transition is not possible without social dialogue. I think in this panel, and I'm sure in this room, we all agree with that. But also thank you for pointing to the fact that there is no one magic solution. Skilling and reskilling is no doubt essential, but we cannot reduce sort of the transition to a greener economy as the worker and actually sectors are concerned only through the needed training and retraining. We need to look at infrastructure, we need to look at all the other dimensions which are very important to make the transition possible but also fair. I'm looking, we have a big watch here, and this watch is actually, I thought actually my body language was very discreet, but Valeria and I, we are both Italian, so maybe we sort of have better understanding of body language from the Italian point of view. Now, the clock said 18 minutes. I hope we can hit into a little bit of your coffee break. We started later than we were supposed to, because I definitely would like to go back to my panelists with the question, the issue that you all have alluded to in your remarks. And it is to say that while we are promoting a green transition, we have also to use, I think, a social dialogue to deal with the crisis we are facing now. We moved from the COVID-19, we were barely moving out of the COVID-19, and now in many countries, there are very many differences across countries, but many countries are facing the cost of living crisis. And this is a tax, and I think, at least in our view, is a tax that cannot be borne only by government through their policy, which absolutely are needed, cannot be borne by employers by themselves, and cannot be borne by workers. So the question, how to share this cost in a way that is equitable and actually will allow us to move out of this new crisis in the best possible way. So we don't have a preconceived sort of order, but I have to be tough here, so I'll give you 2 minutes. I would like really for you to pick up on one example, how social dialogue can help your country, your company, your institution, to some extent to cope with this major crisis we are all facing in different ways, but certainly it's affecting all of our countries. Who would like to start? Please, Minister.
¿Con este? ¿Sí? Para nosotros el diálogo.
For us, tripartite social dialogue over these years of crisis played a fundamental role in the definition of the strategies we needed during the pandemic and also against inflation. So there's always some tension with social partners and government, but we can mention some of the approaches that we took. First of all, the government, as soon as the health emergency started, we set up this tripartite body to be able to lay down working protocols. Dozens of health protocols were agreed and implemented for the different sectors to be able to reactivate the labour market as quickly as possible. And we also adapted the legal framework for social protection, creating new formats linked to insurance for employment insurance, etc., to ensure protection of jobs. So we reached a tripartite agreement in 2020 to link salary to job types. So in our country, we have managed to achieve a reduction in casual labour and coming down 25% from what we'd had before the pandemic to 21% of jobs, which we've seen right through 2022. So also purchasing power dropped in 2021, so we're trying to recover this. Next year we'll have a round of salary councils so that we can guarantee a complete recovery. So, but we have a major challenge before us to complete the salary recovery process in very difficult conditions and continue to stimulate new jobs, thinking about age, gender. Of course, young people are triple the unemployment rate of other groups, and also inclusion of people with disability, and promote more moves towards digitization, promoting laws that will protect the rights of workers in these new contexts. Last year we approved a teleworking law in our country, and we are sending a bill to the Parliament to be able to guarantee corresponding rights in a world where this has really become a major challenge long term. So these changes are coming very quickly. So there were many changes made in the labour market as a result of the pandemic in terms of having effective skills, training enough people. So we have to have social protection networks permanently working with clear objectives to be able to face not just times of crisis, but this is where our networks are most important, but also in other contexts. So we have to create a consensus between all parties involved to be able to face difficult circumstances better through a culture of bargaining, of effective discussion, and effective channeling of requests and demands from the employees. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and we are sure that peace and democracy are more important than ever in this context. And also we need to emphasize the importance of the active participation of all the political parties to be able to respond to our needs. I think I went over my time slightly. Thank you, Stephen.
Just, what am I doing? Two things. International Global Bargaining Forum. It's the only cross-border multinational collective bargaining agreement for seafarers. It's true social dialogue, and we deal with everything. And we're pitching it up now to be part of how do we make maritime green, and that will include digitalisation, training, once we've got the blueprint. And that's nearly 20 years old and was unimaginable before that process was put in place. And I think the last one, and recognising I already took too much time, supply chain accountability. The reality is kind of we got what we deserved. We subcontracted, we made precarious work, we pushed jobs down the supply chain, and we saw through the pandemic that it nearly broke, whether it be port congestion, whether it's the Panama Canal, whichever bit. So the reality is, and we are now working with many of the food multinationals, which is new ground for the ITF because, of course, we have the multinational transport companies, but the food multinationals are actually the ones that set a lot of the prices. So the conversation and the complex nature of everything we're discussing, our societies cannot survive without robust supply chains. And robust supply chains must meet the climate challenge, must understand all the elements, but they have to have the element of mutual respect and trust at the very root to build the solutions. So we are looking, by way of here, I could go through examples of what we do. Solve workplace grievances, human rights abuses. We don't throw them out to the media to score points. We work with those multinationals for a remedy. And that builds trust. But you have to have the mutual respect. And you know, in today's society, we wouldn't say all the powers are equal. But for us, ultimately, and that's the invitation to everybody here, governments, regulators, we have to create the environment where we can have mature conversations that will actually make a real difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Minister De Camps, please.
Testing. Yes, thank you. So, talking about creating the right atmosphere to be able to achieve consensus through and dialogue. I think that dialogue is not an option. It's an obligation, a moral obligation that we have to really materialize any progress. This is the channel that we have to use. So I want to really congratulate the panel on the consensus that has been mentioned. And the admission of our trade union representative, who's mentioned there's some lack of perhaps some stubbornness sometimes towards change. I think this is admirable. So I think this is fundamental that we reach a consensus, and and this regulation on in my republic on teleworking in the Dominican Republic and the work on social protection, we've increased 17 minimum salaries, increased over the level of inflation, but also improving purchasing power by 11%. So we're going through a process of constructing, through this dialogue, a social pact or agreement for a real, fair, decent salary for decent jobs. So this way we can establish parameters where we can look at constant revisions and updates of salaries so that employers can organize themselves better and workers can be more productive. Thank you.
Please.
I think it works. Yeah. Social dialogue is not something that you construct from one day to another. And that's the issue we are facing in some European countries. Because indeed, all our members are going to face the toughest wage negotiation since years. So, of course, it's only employers and workers who are really able to understand what is the level, what is the right level, how far you can go in this context of high inflation. But this is not possible in countries where this infrastructure of social dialogue is not existing. Trust, confidence, mutual respect are key words, but there are EU countries that really have a long time to go in order to reach this strong infrastructure, to have strong bipartisan social dialogue. Plus, there is another element, which is that, at least in our sectors, we very much have to deal with users and users' acceptability of the current situation. Contrary to COVID-19, our members are today, not in COVID-19, but today they are at the fringe of bankruptcy in many sectors because simply the users are not able to pay the energy or other bills. So it's a complex situation that in some countries is not possible to sort out with the social dialogue only bullet silver. You need external tripartite intervention, and that is why my organization is calling for a stronger EU response to the crisis, including the cap prices on gas. And we are happy to see that Europe is moving forward on this. The Council result on the 20th of October are a first step in this direction. And why we need the external intervention? Because this acceptability issue does put in danger not only the social economic model, but also the democratic model, as it was said. In view of the European election, this is going to be very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Minister Molloy?
Well, thank you so much. I think you have taken some of my words, because I think, unlike before, the global economy is actually facing too many issues and which are occurring at the same time. And we are actually, there is some sort of, we are entangled one way or the other in what is happening globally. And we get affected by like what is happening in Russia and Ukraine. Whether we like it or not, it affects all of us. So I think the issues that you just raised, this includes, among others, the issues now of higher food prices, higher fertilizer prices, which is most of our countries, we source them from Russia and Ukraine. So issues of energy, the energy it's high. Our people can't afford it. You go further to rising interest rates, issues of credit spread, currency depreciation, and capital outflows. So, like the World Bank Group President who said recently, referred to this interplay of these developments and elements as overlapping crises. So they overlap one way or the other. Moreover, these problems are occurring actually as the world economy and labor markets are emerging from this debilitating COVID-19 pandemic combined effect of the disease and the measures which were put in place to address some of these issues which resulted in human life. Then the issue of massive economic fallout, disruptions in global trade and large-scale job losses. And I'm sure you are aware that in South Africa we came up with a scheme from our Department of Employment and Labor, one of our entities, the UIF, which is the insurance for our people, for us to mitigate the job losses and preserve more jobs. We spend more than 63 billion South African rands just to mitigate, and we called it TERS, which is Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme. We had to preserve the jobs. So to avoid people losing their jobs, we had to subsidize, we had to pay the employers so that they are able to pay their employees so that they continue to remain in employment and so that they continue to pay us the insurance. So we did that to avoid job losses, and I think it helped us a lot to a certain extent. But also the dominant language in the recent times has been economic recovery and issue of readiness to deal with the future pandemics should they arise. But to be fair, we need to also talk about the fact that it has never been clear how successful some of the efforts have been looking like issues of mixed bag of misfortunes. Not all countries were reporting similar progress and recovery rates. If you remember, and many countries experienced stagnation and battered labor markets. But also, the situation itself was reflective of how vaccine apartheid separated the developed and developing countries. There was no common approach and collective effort, actually, in tackling the disease. That was a problem to all of us. And South Africa, if you know that notably, we led the charge at the World Trade Organization to allow millions of people across the world to access vaccine. I mean, if you remember, sometimes we might be, as an emerging economy, be ahead of the rest of the pack. Remember, we identified Omicron. And for whatever reason, the world started to say, they blocked us immediately to say, but we have identified the fact that there is this other phenomenon. And we didn't say, no, we have seen it from our country, but we have identified it. And we got sidelined by the world for some of the issues that we raised. And I think to us, we think it's apartheid in reverse, that sometimes we are not fairly actually judged as a country.
Thank you so much, Minister, for this very deep consideration indeed. Please, Luis Rodrigo.
Gracias, Stefano.
Thank you. It's good to be the last person, I think, because I can save some time, I think. I could start by concluding that I think there is a consensus on the relevance of importance of social dialogue as a tool to face crises. We saw this very much in COVID. I think one of the main lessons that we've learned is that there are many different manifestations of social dialogue. We have to really push forward with this machinery and looking at intervention and the role that we have to play as social partners. I think we have to say that to be effective in social dialogue, this needs an acceptance of responsibility across the board to be able to create the right environment for social dialogue that would actually progress and create more solid economies and sustainable economies. So this is not just involving companies and employees, but also governments that have a key responsibility in creating this positive environment for effective social dialogue. But we need to be cautious in how we handle social dialogue, because in certain aspects we have to look at the independence of social dialogue spokespeople, thinking about working conditions and salary levels. We have to have a lot of independence for those social partners, and also across the board of all the employment-related organizations. So I would like to recognize, and this is more in the direction of the IOE and organizations of workers across the world, we need to keep sitting down at the bargaining table to be able to move forward decisively, but also with better coordination to advance effectively. So that would be what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Say that it's a pleasure to have IOE participate in the global deal, and we very much look forward to continue the cooperation also with your organization. The last word, if you want, Mrs. Cabezas.
Yes, 1 minute. Bueno, muy rápido.
Very quickly, our negotiating model is very complex, where we have a lot of people involved and very close margins in the B2B market. Now, with the inflation and increase in gas and electricity, we absolutely need a permanent social dialogue. And lastly, with shared responsibility, yes, that's our vision and that's our need. Collaboration, cooperation, as I said at the beginning, I think social dialogue has improved, and we are all on the same boat, as it were, in the same boat, working towards a common objective.
This first panel, I think we had a very rich discussion on the role of social dialogue to actually promote a fair green transition, but also as an important, I would say, an essential tool, some of the speakers said, to deal with the COVID crisis before and now with the cost of living crisis. So I thought that the discussion was extremely rich. We heard a lot of also concrete examples, a lot of commitment by countries, by the social partners, on engage in actually an open dialogue, but also be part of the solution in a constructive way. So it was extremely inspiring for me, and I'm sure with all of you. And with that, I think I would like to close the panel, but I would like you to join me in a round of applause for our panelists, because I think they did a great job. And I think with that, then you can enjoy the coffee break. We will resume at 4:30. Thank you very much for being with us.